Prendiamo posto. Starting? Okay. Thank you, everyone. And first of all, I would like to thank my university for today, because without the support and from my rector, my director, and from my colleagues and from my academic staff too, this project is, I think, is very difficult for me to submit this project. I should win this project. So we first we have some slides, maybe, if you can. First of all, I would like to point your attention about two main reasons for this project. Due to the growing importance of global value chain, because we know in the world workers need to protection not only for companies based in West countries like Italy, Europe, USA, so, but also in overall in countries, developing countries that in their supply chain, because in this there are okay, thank you, special need. Okay. Okay. No. Okay. Need to prevent social and greenwashing because companies often, for reputational reason, could be have some fair behavior, not really, but only for reputational reason. So in Europe, we had okay, other maybe. Rather. Okay. Okay. In Europe, we have some rules about two main directives about sustainability reporting and related European standard, and the due diligence directive too. But in December of this last year, with the Omnibus Package 1, some of the rules are slowed down or blocked to the size of for the reporting directive. We have a new size of 1,000 employees and 450 million turnover, and postpone the entry in force for medium and small companies. But overall, due diligence directive is a very main change, because for this one we have application only for now, is applicable only for very large companies with 5,000 employees, 1.5 billion of turnover, and overall the entry in force is July 2029. Our course about European legislation, ESG principle and due diligence and reporting diligence directives. Then I have some practical laws, some simulation of compliance ESG, but overall 100 hour teaching from everyone, but also 6 workshops. 6 workshops, 3 of them in Italy, in our headquarters in Algerola, on the Amalfitane coast, and 3 abroad, 2 in Europe and 1 in a developing country, I don't know if in Asia or in South America. Yeah. Our team is very important because we had the highest score for the team. So many thanks everyone. Prima o poi ce la farò. Okay. We have 8 professors for Mercator University, not only lawyer, also economists, sociologists, communication expert, and lawyer, not only labor lawyer, but also business lawyer, comparative lawyer too. So many thanks me, but also Maria Antonia Laferri, thank you, Alessandra Micozzi, Elena Sichenko, Anna Bisogno, Valentina Di Balli, Sara Adamo, e Martina Bassotti. But we have also, no, on the other side, 7 other members of the project from 7 different universities. Okay. So thanks to Manfred Weiss from Goethe University of Frankfurt, Wilfredo Sanguinetti Ramon from Salamanca University, Alcyon Guaman from Quito University and Valencia University too, Bas Rambo from Tilburg University, Maria Raffaella Barbato, thank you, from Minas Gerais University, Katia Forenzia from Sagna University, and Paola Coletti from Milan University. And finally, we have the 2 boards to monitoring the progress of our project. One internal scientific committee from me, Antonella Ferri, Anna Bisogno, and Manfred Weiss, and an external advisory board, Mario Silvero de Barros and Valentina Franca. Many thanks to Valentina to be here. Finally, what are the results we expect from this project? We hope to have 150 participants on site and online each year for 3 years. Many participants maybe, but the last project had 1,500 participants, so we can imagine it's possible to have more or less 450 participants in this course. Some output, events, publication, and or articles, books, and our website, and podcast from Anna Bisogno about sustainability due diligence to share worldwide our results. And finally, because we would like to building a global network of researchers about due diligence, but we would like to fund an observatory on due diligence and ESG principle in general, because we would like to monitoring new law, new best practices, new case study, to monitoring what's happening in the future about due diligence and ESG principles. So that's all. I thank you everyone, and now I give the floor to Elena Sichenko to moderate the seminar and the debate. Thank you, Elena.
Thank you so much, Marco. Thank you everyone for coming. I think it's really a big day for all of us and for the university as well, because having the Jean Monnet Cattedra all'Università, it's really a very precious endeavor, and Marco did a really great job to achieve this success. And hopefully all the activities which will be within the Jean Monnet Cathedra will be very successful, I don't doubt. Today we have wonderful guests, and the idea behind the whole event was to gather a perspective on sustainability from different corners, because sustainability can be about everything and about nothing. So we want to see it from different angles, because first of all, we have an academic perspective, and this is why we are super glad to welcome here Professor Manfred Weiss. He is emeritus professor from the University of Frankfurt and is our very esteemed guest. And I'm very thankful, Manfred, that you came. Also, we have another perspective from the part of the consultancy and also from the part of the authors who developed the Bible for sustainability, the United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. Because our another guest, Gerald Pashut, he was the part of the team of John Ruggie when they elaborated the principles, which were then adopted at the United Nations in 2011. And also, we have another perspective from business. And for this, we have another guest, Laura Martiniello. She's professor at the University of Mercatorum and the president of Italfer. So I hope that this approach to sustainability as to the complex issue, but representing these three kind of building blocks, will make us clearer what it is about. And also it will be easier for us to go further with the activities of the Jean Monnet Cathedral. So having said that, I would like to invite, because we had to change a little bit the program, and we will start with Professoressa Laura Martiniello. Is she connected? Cambiato l'idea? Allora noi cominciamo con Manfred. Ok, then we will just start as we did. No, non c'è, vedi che non c'è. No. Ok. No, it's fine. Then we will follow with that the order which is put in the program. And according to the program, the first one to speak is Professor Manfred Weiss. So Manfred Weiss, thank you again for coming. And the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Elena. First, invited me. It's a great honor to be at the opening of this important project on social sustainability. Well, I would like to try to give you an idea on what had happened so far in the area of social sustainability without going into details. And I will be very brief because we have so many speakers. And I also might be a bit provocative. Do we have a discussion afterwards? Yeah, good. Yeah, then we can discuss about these things. Well, the universal respect for human rights in the social field is a precondition for sustainability. Otherwise, it doesn't work. States are obliged to implement such rights contained in many, many international and regional instruments. However, actual practice of many states, many states do not want to give up their competitive advantages as cheap labor countries, thereby not living up to the required states. There are also quite often in many developing states fears that they cannot live up to these standards because their infrastructure is not good enough. Maybe we can talk about this later on. Well, to just give you an idea of the actual situation, child labor still amounts to about 160 million children. Half of them are performing hazardous work. 25 million people still are in forced labor, threatened by withholding wages, by violence against themselves, or by family members. But not only these extremes, as child labor and forced labor, are worrying. Other core labor rights, and in particular, the rules on health and safety requirements, widely are violated. And in the context, in particular, of global value chains. In many of those chains, ahuman and degrading treatment, exploitation by unfair low wages, and extreme long working hours are rather the rule than the exception. In particular, multinationals can have use of these imbalance of standards. Therefore, already in the 70s of last century, the ILO, the International Labor Organization, based in Geneva, and the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, based in Paris, they passed guidelines for multinationals to make sure that international labor standards are to be respected. This was the starting point for a huge amount of so-called codes of conduct. They are voluntarily established. But if I say voluntarily, I should say this is not always really voluntarily. I give you an example. Some decades ago, there was this company, which you know much better than I do, Nike, you know, the sportswear. And they have violated everything, everywhere in their supply chains. Horrible. But there was an NGO, and the NGO was called Clean Clothing. And this NGO, Clean Clothing, fantastic women, by the way, very tough. They organized a boycott on the home soil of Nike in the United States. And this boycott really was efficient. And then they started to have codes of conduct. You can call this voluntarily. I would say, well, voluntarily, but under pressure, okay? Well, many of the codes cover subcontractors as well as the whole value chain. All these codes are legally, and that's important, non-binding soft law. There is only a moral obligation of the multinationals to respect them. The big problem is monitoring. Even if most codes promote for monitoring, in the meantime, we have what we could call a real certification industry, checking the observance of these codes and granting a positive label in case of non-violation. However, it's very doubtful whether this procedure tells anything about the efficiency of the codes. It has to be kept in mind that the certifying agencies are paid by the companies. And of course, they want to be the checking companies and monitoring companies next year again. Therefore, the so-called social labeling should not be taken too seriously. It has turned out that it is mainly an instrument for the company's marketing policy. In short, and to make the point, codes of conduct should not be overestimated. They mainly serve the protection of the company's image. The lesson to be learned by the whole range of these so-called corporate social responsibility measures, and there are included also the Global Compact by the United Nations, which was initiated by the General Director Kofi Annan, and where many companies would have to sign up that they respect the core labor standards and something more. You know, all this is, well, very nice, but not very efficient. And the same is true for the so-called contact points of the OECD, where you can complain and where there will be some mediation, but of course, nothing which really is binding and obligatory. Well, all these measures, as I said, the lesson is very simple. Soft law instruments based on voluntarism are by no means an appropriate tool to guarantee the respect of social rights in multinationals and in global value chains. What is needed are binding and enforceable rules. I would like to show you how far this need is met. And I said already, I try not to go into details. I simply will draw or more sketch the big lines. A first push for improving the situation came from the United Nations. The United Nations Human Rights Council endorsed in 2011, as we already heard, the guiding principles of business and human rights, which were annexed in the famous Ruggie report. Ruggie, by the way, was a professor of Harvard who unfortunately died in the meantime. The different member states were supposed to transform these principles into national action plans. This happened, but it unfortunately did not end up in binding rules, but in mere recommendations, pushing mainly soft pressure on the companies. Again, soft law has prevailed. And as empirical studies show, the real effect tends to be very modest. In the meantime, the Rana Plaza building crashed down in 2013 in Bangladesh, killing more than 1,000 people and leaving thousands injured. Rana Plaza, it was every evening in the news, has worked as an eye-opener, or if you want, as a watchdog, as a wake-up call, and led to the Accord on Fire and Building Safety in Bangladesh, a legally binding agreement between global brands, global trade unions, and the ILO, designed to build a safe and healthy Bangladesh ready-made garment industry. This accord has been renewed in 2021 as International Accord for the garment industry. And in the meantime, since 2023, Pakistan is also a member. This accord, I cannot go into, we don't have time for this. This accord is really, it could be a model for the kind of regulation we need. But as good as this accord may be, it only is focusing on a very small number of countries, and it only is focusing on one branch of industry, namely the garment industry. And it only is dealing with health and safety. This, of course, is by far not enough. We need a much broader piece of regulation. In 2014, something very important happened. Two states, Ecuador and South Africa, initiated the United Nations Human Rights, in the United Nations Human Rights Council, a resolution for a comprehensive, binding, universal instrument, an international and uniform solution, no longer relying on national action plans, to be elaborated by an open-ended intergovernmental working group. The resolution was accepted, but, and this tells you stories, against the votes of the highly industrialized countries where the headquarters of the MNE are based. The working group has presented, in the meantime, several drafts. The latest not only imposes on the member states the duty to prevent violations of human rights by specific mechanisms and procedures, but also regulates, and that's very important, the victim's access to courts or alternative independent and impartial bodies of conflict resolution, and establishes requirements for fair procedure, including a change of the burden of proof in favor of the victims. However, it does not look that there is a chance that soon a binding treaty will be concluded. This would be of utmost importance, since this is the only project we have where actors from all over the world are participating, not only states, but also civil society, trade unions, NGOs, and so on. And I can tell you from my own experience how important this is. You know, I worked very much in the Global South. And when I'm in the Global South, people tell me, what you are doing in Europe, when you are regulating something, we couldn't care less, because nobody asks us. We are not participating. We are out. We simply have to obey what you do. This project is different. This project is a project where they all are integrated, which of course doesn't make things easier. You know, there are many voices, but I think that's how it has to be done. But as I said, for the near future, no chance that there will be such an international treaty. In this landscape of hope and frustration, individual states regulated this matter themselves. France in 2017 was the forerunner, and the latest was my country, Germany, in 2011. But as I can tell you later on, in Germany, we are now in a situation where we are discussing whether we should abolish it again. It's unbelievable. However, as good or bad these laws of individual states may be, if only individual countries pass such legislation, it is very problematic. This might lead to competitive disadvantages for parent companies situated in these countries. They might be inclined to move to another country, which, by the way, within the European Union is pretty easy. Therefore, an international or at least regional instrument is indispensable. I cannot see, as I said already, the possibility for an international instrument in the moment. There were attempts in the ILO. As you know, the ILO has a tripartite structure: trade unions, employers' associations, and governments. Trade unions wanted a convention on social sustainability. No chance, no chance, you know. They ended up with some recommendation which more or less is as useless as what I told you with the soft law mechanisms we have already. The European Union, as we already heard, regionally has met the expectation by two directives. In 2021, by the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, and in 2024, by the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. The Reporting Directive requires companies of a certain size to report on what they did in the social and environmental field. And the Due Diligence Directive contains obligations for the companies, their subsidiaries, and business partners to prevent violations of human rights in the value chain, to establish liability for violations, and to elaborate transition plans for climate change migration. Let's now look a bit closer to these two directives. Let's start with the reporting directive. This directive had a predecessor. The European Union already in 2014 had established a reporting system on social matters by the Non-Financial Reporting Directive, where large companies which are of public interest entities of at least 500 employees were required to annually report on how their performance refers to social matters. The treatment of employees, the respect for human rights, their fight against corruption, and the promotion of diversity in the boards. This directive has been replaced by the mentioned reporting directive, and this reporting directive brought three important changes. First, it extends the coverage of companies by lowering the threshold down to 250 employees. Second, In the environment area, it requires the companies to report their plans to ensure sustainable economy. And third, it requires independent monitoring, providing reasonable assurance in order to prevent greenwashing and mere marketing reports. Let's now have a look to the second directive. The overall objective of the directive on corporate sustainability due diligence is, now I quote, to ensure that companies active in the internal market contribute to sustainable development through the identification, prevention, and mitigation, bringing to an end minimization of potential or actual adverse human rights and environmental impacts connected with companies' own operations, subsidiaries, and value chains. End of quote. The directive covers companies, or covered, we have to say unfortunately now, covered companies of at least 1,000 employees with an annual turnover of 450 million euro. It referred to human rights in the broadest sense, including the right to fair wages, to safe and healthy working conditions, as well as the right to reasonable limitation of working hours. Member states should ensure that companies conduct human rights and environmental due diligence in order to prevent and mitigate potential adverse impacts. Complaints have to develop a prevention action plan in consultation. Companies have to develop a prevention action plan. I don't see anymore, that's why I have problems. Action plan in consultation with all affected stakeholders. In case there are adverse impacts, they have to do everything to bring them to an end. Member states have to prove a compliance, to provide, a compliance procedure for persons and specific organizations, as for example, trade unions and other workers' representatives, as well as civil society organizations, to submit complaints. According to the directive, it has to be ensured that each company designates an authorized representative, established or domiciled in one of the member states where the company operates. One or more supervisory authorities to supervise compliance are to be established in each member state. They may initiate investigations, conduct inspections, identify failures, and take remedial action. The possibility for legal and natural persons to submit substantiated complaints or concerns to any supervisory authority had to be guaranteed. Member states have to provide effective, proportionate, and persuasive sanctions for violations. And most important, the directive establishes a system of civil liability if companies intentionally or negligently fail to comply with their obligations, and this causes damages. The directive also contains facilities of procedure for the claimants. In particular, their claims can be taken over by trade unions or NGOs. The company is not liable for damages caused by subsidiaries or business partners, but only for damages caused by themselves. That's the main content of these directives. And these two directives, and I'm sure you agree with me, would have meant an important step forward. However, we heard it already. They met strong resistance. They are attacked as overburdening the companies, especially those of smaller size. And therefore, on 8 November 2024, the Council of Ministers of the European Union has passed a 12-point declaration to strengthen the competitivity of the European Union. This is a so-called Budapest Declaration. It was in Budapest because at that time Hungary had the presidency of the European Union. How should they strengthen the competitivity? By reducing bureaucracy. Point 4 of this declaration seeks to simplify, postpone, and partly abolish the obligations of the two directives and ask the Commission to act accordingly. The Commission in February 2025, last year, presented a proposal for a so-called, as we already heard, Omnibus 1 directive. I don't know who has invented this stupid name, Omnibus 1 directive. Reducing these obligations. The pretext is in line with the Council's declaration, was of course reducing bureaucracy. And this is always very popular. The goal was mainly to further limit the scope of application, to postpone the transposition of the directives, to cover only direct partners in the value chain, and to delete civil liability. As far as the postponing is concerned, already in April 2025, a directive, has again a stupid name, the so-called Stop the Clock Directive, has been passed, according to which the first reporting and the first due diligence depending on the size of the company, has to be postponed until 2028 or 29. Since the end of last year, we now have a consensus for an Omnibus 1 directive. The passing of the directive only will be a formality. I hope it will happen the next few weeks. Well, I don't hope, but I fear. It deregulates the two directives and two others which I here ignore. The scope of application of the reporting directive is elevated to companies with at least 1,000 employees instead of 250, and a net turnover of 450 million, which means only the big companies have to report. And instead of annual reports, they only are required to report every 3 years. For the due diligence directive, mainly two significant reductions, with many others, have been made. Only very big companies of at least 5,000 employees with an annual turnover of 1.5 billion euro. These are the giants. These are the very big companies. Instead of 1,000 employees and 4.5 million euro. And they only are covered. And what's even worse, civil liability is totally abolished. In addition, the requirements for due diligence have been lowered, and this is just a dramatic change. To sum up this brief overview, it may be appreciated that in the last 15 years, the protection of social rights in the international business context undoubtedly has made significant progress. The shift from mere soft law to binding instruments is a very important step forward. It's a new quality. Regionally, as I already said, the EU had become the forerunner, but a universally binding instrument is still missing. However, the European regulation, as we could see, only survives as a fragment. Fears that the measures taken to protect human rights in the social field may impact negatively economic growth. This idea still is more powerful than ever. And it is more powerful than the intention to protect social rights. To promote their respect in global value chains, the promotion of respect of human rights in global value chains still is understood by influential actors in economy as a competitive disadvantage for the multinationals in particular. This is to a great extent irrational and has to be overcome. Empirical studies, mainly made by the ILO, show that long-term economic success depends on respect of social rights. The revitalization of European Union social policy after the European Pillar of Social Rights is now replaced by a backlash. This, in my view, is a totally wrong signal. In a time in which autocratic leaders in many states ignore the rule-based order of the world, we need more and more than ever, respect for human rights, and particularly social human rights, if we want to achieve social sustainability. In such a situation, A project as the one we have here on social sustainability is extremely important. It has to do empirical studies, to look what's going on, to see the kind of deficiencies, and to develop proposals of what can be done. Hopefully in the international field, but at least in the regional field. Thank you very much for your attention.
Bravissimo, Manfred. Thank you so much for this wonderful outlook of the evolution of the standards from the idea of creating soft law to creating soft law, then to idea of making binding standards, and now the pushback, the steps which the EU is doing, unfortunately, in the different direction. Thank you so much. And now I would like to give a floor to Laura Martiniello. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so
Hi,
much.
can you hear me?
Laura is the CEO of Italfer, and so she represents the business perspective on sustainability. Laura, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Can you hear? Can you hear me?
You are muted.
Yeah?
Yeah, now it's fine. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Can you hear me? Okay. I'm very sorry I can't be there with you, but I had some family problems. I have a view that starts from the same directive that Mr. Weiss so well described just before. And I'm sorry I can't share my slide because of some connection problem, but I will speak of supply chain management and ESG, describing the experience of a large Italian company, because I'm honored to be the chairman of Italfer. That's an engineering company in the FS Ferrovie dello Stato group. Some initial consideration. As we know, ESG factors have become an essential framework for evaluating corporate sustainability and long-term value creation. As companies increasingly operate within a complex global supply chain, ESG performance is no longer limited to internal operation, but extended across supplier, partners, and logistic networks. So I'd like to speak about the two main directives about sustainability, the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive and the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive in the light of the supply chain management. The first one, the CS3D, strongly increases the need for transparencies and monitoring third-party suppliers, and firms must restructure supplier contracts and introduce monitoring system to meet due diligence requirements. According to Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, the CSRD, company must gather, audit, and disclose data, for example, on scope 3 emission, human rights, and other ESG issues tied to procurement, and have to increase pressure on suppliers to provide data and adopt standards that align with buyer reporting requirements. So integrating ESG principle into supply chain management enhances resilience, reduce operational and reputational risk, supports sustainable and business growth. Company, and in particular large company, align supply chain strategy with ESG objective, and in this way they are better positioned to meet stakeholder expectation and adapt to evolving regulatory and market demands. In the experience of Italy, in the experience of Italfer, that is, as I told you, an engineering company that design and supervise major rail and transport infrastructure projects in Italy and internationally in more than 15 foreign countries, we have we put a strong effort on sustainability. And in particular, ITERFER supplier qualification system is a system that uses a formal qualification for our suppliers, and it must include our supplier participation must include ESG performance assessment. And moreover, it has to include compliance with international standard, such as ISO 9001, 40001, and so on. I think that integration of sustainability concept into supplier selection, enhancing environmental and social performance upstream and downstream. Can you hear me always?
Yes.
Another important pillar for ITERFER is the procurement and tendering. Procurement in the FS group, and in particular in ITERFER, is structured. I can see you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Okay. No, I couldn't see anymore the room. So I was speaking about procurement and tendering because in our company is structured around some tendering procedure for suppliers, for selection of suppliers, subcontractor, and services. And ESG rating is part of the F Group broader sustainability strategy and is now being progressively required in various types of tender issued by the company. The ESG score has become a critical factor in tender processes, especially for public entities, infrastructure owners, and large corporates. Its importance goes well beyond reputation and increasingly affect eligibility, scoring, and contract award. So you can imagine how it's important to have a good score when you are competing for a contract award. So creating effective and incentive for sustainability in the supply chain requires aligning environmental and social objectives with supplier and economic operational interests. And company must move beyond compliance-based approach and embedded sustainability to procurement, contracts, and performance measurement. Moreover, we set clear, measurable, and sustainability targets. Supplier needs clarity on expectation. So company, and in particular large companies, should define measurable ESG KPI, such as carbon intensity, safety performance, labor standard, waste reduction, and targets should be realistic, phased over time, and aligned with international standards. Moreover, big company has to support suppliers through collaboration and capacity building. Incentive work best when combined with support, and big company can provide technical assistance, access to sustainability tools, data platform, or financing, or join innovation projects for low carbon material and circular solution. Moreover, sustainability requirement should be formalized through suppliers' code of conduct, ESG clauses in contract, regular audits and performance review, because strong governance ensure accountability and consistent implementation across the supply chain. So, in conclusion, in my opinion, well-designed incentive makes sustainability a driver of value creation, resilience, and long-term supply chain performance. We can achieve these results through embedded ESG criteria into procurement and contracts, using measurable ESG KPI to guide supplier performance, combine incentive with supplier support and collaboration, strength governance, transparency, and accountability. ESG directive push larger company to map their entire supply chain, identify ESG incentives, and achieve sustainability results. So we think we are on the good direction to help our suppliers to reach this important objective and to become more sustainable. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Laura. I hope you hear the applause. Do you?
Yes, yes.
Thank you for this presentation. It's always very interesting to listen to the point of view of business, and particularly pleasant to hear that you sustain that implementing ESG is beneficial for the company. And actually, it was in the corner of John Draghi's idea when he was developing the UNGPs and when he was criticized by many NGOs that he's not fighting for the binding legal instrument. He was absolutely sure that it's not the binding legal instrument that would work, but rather it is a soft law approach. And here I would like to now to shift to another speaker, to Gerald Pashut. Do I pronounce correctly your name, Gerald? Okay. So Gerald, I'm really happy to meet Gerald, and I would like to thank another colleague who also worked with Gerald in the team of John Draghi. Gerald now works in the consultancy, it's Pluto and Associates, and he was one of the advisors of Professor John Draghi during the elaboration, during many years. Imagine 6 years to elaborate this instrument. So during these 6 years, Gerald was assistant to Professor John Draghi. And before you would go to speaking about the contributions of the UNDP, could you kindly share a little bit how was it to work with Professor John Draghi? Because each time when I listen to his lectures, when I read his books, I'm just amazed by by the scope of the person, by the personality of this professor. He was really an amazing person. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, and thank you for the invitation. We start on an emotional note because working with John for those 6 years were amazing. Something that people don't realize is that John was a very smart guy, but it was a very decent person on top of everything else. So it was really interesting. And I will say that you said 6 years. 6 years in UN time is nothing. 6 years in UN time to get from a very contested and hot discussion to a document that is accepted by consensus is the blink of an eye. And as a parallel, look at what's happening for the negotiation on the treaty. 12, 13 years, 14 years, and nothing to show for it, which allow me to cover a point that was dear to John, but is important today, and following up on what Professor Weiss said, the law is essential, but it's not enough. If the law was the answer, we would know it by now. And something that we tend to forget is that everything that is covered by the guiding principles is already existing international law. It's already, all the norms are already embodied in the different human rights treaty. But we know also that states are either unwilling or unable to respect those norms. And something that I always ask, and I'm still waiting for the answer, is for people who are pushing for a treaty to explain to me why states will respect that treaty when they don't respect the others. And that's not even getting into geopolitics of the moment. If someone gets something accepted at the UN these days, they deserve everything because the situation is extremely blocked. So, and hear me well, I'm not saying, just like I hope John was saying, that we shouldn't pursue legally binding instrument, but we should also have a cost benefit analysis in mind. Because, and that's one of the point and one of the contribution of the guiding principles to this whole discussion. If you want to change the behavior of a state, which is international law, you have two options, either the gun or the law. If you want to change the behavior of a company, you have many more tools. You have the market, you have civil society pressure, you have investor pressure, and you have legally binding measure. So I think it's extremely important to always remember actually pillar one, the UN guiding principles that define or that go over the role of the state, that should, of course, be about legal measures, but so many others. Because, and that's where we need to be also a bit tactical, and we have seen that with CSDDD and CSRD. When you try to have this discussion, the pushback will be strong and from powerful actors. But we should always remember that a treaty or a law or whatever is a means to an end. The end is to improve respect for sustainability by company. You can reach that end from many different angles. And let's focus on the law, but let's not focus on the law only. So you know, to follow up on what you were saying, John never said, on the contrary, because he was attacked for that, never said that we shouldn't pursue legally binding measure. He said that we shouldn't put all our eggs in the same basket. And to finish on that, I'll give you one very clear example on child labor. Child labor is regulated everywhere in the world. The ILO Convention against child labor is one of the most ratified, still poorly enforced. And I'm asking, what do you think works best? A non-legal internal directive from a company not to have child labor, or the convention? And we know for a fact that for companies, it's much easier to project norms in all their subsidiaries and in the world. So we should always keep that option in our pocket. Let's focus on the law, but let's not focus only on the law, because that cuts us short. So you asked me to discuss the key contribution of the guiding principles to the sustainability agenda. But first of all, thanks for the invitation and congratulations on the new chair. It's extremely important to see your Center of Excellence becoming a reality, because then it's one of my pet issues. One of the problems we have in this sustainability or business and human rights discussion is that most of the discussion take place in the Anglo-Saxon world, with the consequences in terms of mindset and cultural approach that creates. So I think it's extremely important to see more and more academic and practice centers emerging from other places. So it will be very interesting to see your work. And so I assume that everybody knows about the guiding principles, but very quickly they were developed over 6 years on a UN mandate to clarify the responsibilities of business vis-a-vis human rights. So not really sustainability, but the social element of it framed as human rights. It is a soft law instrument because it was endorsed by the Human Rights Council by consensus, like I say, no small feat. But it is authoritative. And again, I come back to the point I was making earlier. For instance, for many businesses, not all businesses, but many businesses, they are the law. They don't care about the qualification, the labor. That's where things are defined, and that's what they will do. And again, and I can never stress that enough. And I teach international law, and I love international law, and I believe in it. But we need to see the limitations and how to make something work. So not legally binding, still authoritative. But before I speak about the contribution, I think it could be interesting to talk about one of the key challenges in sustainability, which is that it's one of the most used and most misused word in business and policy. Sustainability means everything. Everybody claims that they are sustainable, but I always struggle to find a definition of sustainability, and even fewer practice have actually changed outcomes on the ground. Sustainability is everything from a branding exercise to an ESG score with unprecise data to environment, still the biggest issue. Sustainability equals environment. But also sometimes philanthropy. Oh, we paid football jersey for those poor African kids. I'm so sustainable. Risk management, reacting only when there is an NGO campaign, or voluntary commitment that are basically promises without a lot of consequences. So I think that that's maybe the first point. The guiding principles changed that. They provided content to sustainability, at least the social element. But I would argue, and it's a point I always make to companies, that they can use the system of the guiding principle beyond human rights narrowly defined, beyond social. If you, and we'll do the exercise, if you apply the principles of the principles to environment, it works. If you apply the same concept to any of the non-commercial activities, they will work. And actually, what is interesting, something that is part of history now, is that we worked very closely with the OECD in 2010 and 2011 to make sure that we aligned the OECD guidelines on multinational enterprise with the concept of the guiding principles. And it was very important to us to have this alignment because the timing was that the OECD guidelines would be updated before the guiding principles were accepted. And we were not sure that they would be accepted. So we front-loaded a lot of things into the OECD guidelines. And doing that, we realized that actually the OECD guideline covers 6 different topics beyond human rights. And we realized that, due diligence is actually working in all the different chapters. So really see the guiding principles on human rights as being beyond human rights. But in terms of contribution to sustainability, they are definitely providing food or flesh to the S in ESG, which is very poorly defined. It has been a reframing, but much more than an additional framework. To me, it's a corrective framework because it allowed the discussion on sustainability writ large to move from intent, more or less vague policies, or simply respect for the law, a compliance approach, to practices, business practices or strategies that are focused on 1, impact, 2, outcome, and 3, responsibility, by opposition to a voluntary commitment. I do something because I'm responsible, not because I feel like doing it. And this shift is important, at least to me, because as a management tool, sustainability over the years has largely failed. We just heard about the Rana Plaza. All the companies and the brand and everything in Rana Plaza were sustainable. And yet we didn't have the systems and the processes behind it to back it up. Think about the green transition. How many green projects actually have horrendous consequences? And you are very close to the business world here at the university. A point I always like to make, you cannot care about human rights or people, but usually when you hurt people, at some point they will hurt you back. Either by shutting down your operation, either by launching a campaign against you. So it's not being good, it's being smart to respect people and to respect human rights. And yeah, like I was saying, this green transition sustainable project so many times are actually feeding very bad thing. I have an example. I was working on a case in Africa, carbon offsetting project where they did everything by the book in sustainable term. What they didn't look at is moving a community on the territory of a community that they had been fighting for 25 years. But it was green. The carbon offset was great. But 30 people died because, you know, they were not so great neighbors. So all this to say that the opening up sustainability to a much more principled and process-based framework is much more than an addition, it's a correction. And so, see, if I look quickly at the different contribution, of course, the first one, the contribution of the guiding principle to the sustainability agenda, the first one is clearly human rights due diligence. Students are usually young, and so they don't have this historical perspective of old people that take things for granted. Human rights due diligence now is a completely accepted concept and terms. It was entirely new in 2011. It's something that didn't exist. This idea of looking at your impact and what it means very concretely in terms of responsibility. So I think that was, and that has been by far the largest contribution of the guiding principles, establishing that clear understanding that company have to look at their impact, and it's three words that you will hear everywhere, not mentioning the guiding principles, but companies have to identify, prevent, or mitigate their negative impacts. And those three concepts are the essence of due diligence, which has been put in the sustainability debate. And very quickly, like I said earlier, forget about human rights. Identify, prevent, mitigate any negative impact from business, be it social, environmental, corruption, which is much more legalized, but still, you can see that for businesses, that's the tool, and that should be the way to be truly sustainable. If they can demonstrate that they looked, they tried to prevent, and when things went wrong, they corrected, the situation is the essence of sustainability. But something also that is extremely important and that business should hear more is that by framing the responsibility of business, clearly the UN guiding principles have established a floor, minimum expectation, but they also have established a ceiling. Business are not responsible for everything. which is a claim that you often see. Oh, you're so rich that why don't you pay for that school or for this road or whatnot? Well, now we have an international standard, non-legally binding, yet authoritative, that clearly sets your responsibility as a business. And that's actually, something that happens very, very frequently, equipping business to tell a community or to tell an NGO or to tell someone, no, we won't do that because that's not our responsibility as defined by international standard. You can always decide for whatever reasons to do it, but you don't have to. And it's an extremely important distinction in this sustainability discussion. So in short, the due diligence inserted this idea of know and show, know what's going on and be able to show, to demonstrate that you have done something, and a floor and a ceiling. The second point and the second contribution probably is this new understanding of materiality. In sustainability, materiality is always extremely important, but it's always understood, and we had the discussion at the EU level, it's always understood from the business perspective as financial risk. The guiding principle made material impact on people as a key element of sustainability, the double materiality discussion. But having this people-based prioritization was definitely another key contribution. 3, looking beyond tier 1. If you look over the years at sustainable actions by companies, action or policies, it always stopped at tier 1 because it's impossible to go beyond that. The architecture of the guiding principles, particularly with this concept of direct linkage, goes way beyond. As long as you are connected to an issue that will be most of the time a sustainability issue, not necessarily a human rights issue, as long as you are connected through your product or services to something not so great, you have a responsibility. But again, a differentiated responsibility depending on your proximity to the bad thing happening. So it's the cause, contribute, or directly linked discussion. Again, a key element if you want to be able to claim that you are sustainable. Oh, I'm having Nutella, but I have palm oil. Oh, yeah, but none of my supplier, tier 1, have palm oil. Yeah, but it's like 80% of your product. So you should do something about what's happening in palm oil plantation. So I think that has expanded the scope of actionable sustainability. And maybe a last point, it's this idea of remedy. Sustainability didn't discuss remediation at all, because the idea is that, oh, we are protecting the future generations, so we are good. Well, actually, things go bad often. And so you need to do something as a business about it, and with very clear trigger for action. And I think that here again, that has brought a key contributions to the understanding of sustainability. Sustainability is also about remediation, and not only in terms of carbon offset or sustainable environmental manner. So quickly to conclude, I think that one of the benefits of the guiding principles, and we have touched on it, is that it has provided a common language and a shared language. Due diligence, like we said, this idea of leverage rather than influence, And the key aspect of remediation. And it's important to have this common language because as we have seen over the last 10, 15 years, having this common language has allowed for regulation to be developed. The whole DD in CSDDD is about due diligence. And we can develop that because we know what we are talking about. It has been useful in terms of investor engagement, but also, and once again, a very important but undervalued point, it has also helped companies to have internal discussion. Because when you are the sustainability manager, most of people don't know what you do. So with this clear understanding and articulation and regime provided by the guiding principles, it also helps the internal discussion. And finally, because we discussed it, the regulation and the EU directives. First, I think it's important to realize that we look a lot at Brussels, but maybe because I'm Swiss, so we are not part of that. But we actually see legally binding developments in many different regions of the world. And Latin America and Asia are probably much more dynamic than Europe. So the legal discussion, essential, important, not sufficient, is happening in very different places. The second point, I think that is important, and that would help in the discussion with business and the pushback, is that when you look at it, CSRD and CSDDD are very different instruments. And as much as CSDDD respect the spirit and the letter of the guiding principles, in my very modest opinion, CSRD is not. If you look at the guiding principles, you will see, and we took great care of not talking about reporting, but communication, because engagement with stakeholders, affected or not, can be done through reporting, but not only. So communication is important. It's not important that you report. And we have to admit, as supporter of business and human rights or sustainability, that CSRD is actually a very bad directive. It has been, in my opinion, captured by the reporting industry that have developed all those indicators that, are good at making money, if you are one of those companies, are not helping companies to know exactly what they are doing. There are so many points, and it makes no sense. And the problem with that is that CSDDD paid the price for that. Because CSDDD actually is not so administratively cumbersome and so on and so forth. CSRD is. CSRD is, and there is no guarantee that all this reporting will improve your performance in terms of human rights or sustainability. So I think that we need to acknowledge that, yes, the forces of finance have backstabbed progress, but we give them a very nice opportunity. And I think that in the future, we need to keep that in mind, because again, due diligence as a concept is something that can avoid over complication. And the German law, with all its limitation, was a good example of that. Mostly, and not a huge fan, but for different reasons. I think that it shows that you can have a fairly simple law that has a fairly simple admin burden. And my very last point, and I will hold you collectively responsible as we are in Italy, is this understanding of the Draghi report and competitiveness, which has, justified a lot of the pushback. Again, I make a big difference between CSRD and CSDDD, but if we focus only on due diligence, thinking that exonerating European business from due diligence will help them being more competitive is probably in line for the most stupid idea of the 21st century. Because if business think that they can fight the global south on price of production or working conditions, they are in for an interesting discussion. And it's actually a discussion we had 20 years ago, precisely with child labor. We have had the exact same discussion with the same line of reasoning. Oh, we need to protect our competitiveness. It's a fight that has been lost a long time ago. And thinking that you deregulate will make you be more more competitive is a ludicrous idea. Let's imagine, I had this discussion with a business chamber recently. Let's imagine that your wish is made true. So no more social protection, no more environmental protection. Let's have fun and work. How long do you think that your factories will operate? So, we have to be a bit smarter than that. And I have to say, and on all sides, but I have to say that this discussion on competitiveness should be, and it's something that as an academic center would be interesting to tackle. It should be much more sophisticated than what we see. Because again, if European business will fight on lowering standards, it will be a tough fight. And finally, also, there is the law, but there is the market. And we see more and more that, insurance companies, investors, civil society is looking very closely at what business is doing in terms of due diligence. And maybe we won't have a law. Maybe we will have a very weak CSDDD or whatever. But if you don't, if you're not responsible, you will be unable to get insurance. You will be unable to get extra finance. You will be unable to get investment. So all in all, I think, it is in the interest of business, just as society at large, to move with intent on all these different points and to stop with this competitiveness discussion. Thank you.
All the contributions of the UNGPs, and it came to my mind the metaphor of UNGPs as the beautiful marble stone, an Italian marble stone put into the foundation of sustainability, and then something really weird was built on it, something very eclectic, if not to say messy. So this is the feeling that I have. So the start was really good, but then it went to very different directions. And now we can start the debate. And if I may abuse my role of a moderator, I would like to formulate the question for both our speakers. Yeah, Barbara is already here. So I like very much the example. I will start with you, Gerald. The example which you made about the African community. Because I have a feeling that now we speak, when professionals speak about ESG or sustainability, they speak about factors, indicators, and all other words which have nothing to do with humans. So I have a feeling that humans and human rights were kind of lost in the translation from the UNGP principles to what has become the framework for the everyday work for, I don't know, consultants in the ESG and so on. So do you think that it is possible to somehow moderate this bureaucracy to be ensured that human is still there? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I think you're right. And again, it's the guiding principles are very well named because that's what they are, what you should do at a strategic level. And that's what we have lost, particularly in CSRD. And that's the problem because we have moved to silly indicators and all that. You know, to me, engagement with affected people or their representatives and talking outside of the gate is key. You don't need 57 different indicators to do that. You need to do it. And you need to be able to demonstrate that you did it. But that's it. You know, that's one point. Not, I don't know how many indicators in in one of the complex Excel table there is on stakeholder engagement, but that should be 2 lines. And maybe I'm not, you know, demanding enough, but what we want is not to box check, is to do something for a mean to an end. The end is to get the perspective of the of these people. How you do it matters not so much. But yes, it's possible. It's possible.
Hopefully. Thank you. And Manfred, I had a question for you because Gerald said that UNGP is again created the understanding of sustainability, at least of the social part. Adesso meglio? Ah, okay. Because it referred to the International Bill of Human Rights and it referred to ILO fundamental labor standards.
Yes.
And I have a problem here because business very often, it sees only fundamental labor standards and forgets that labor rights are the part of human rights. So for example, if we speak about the right to strike, well, I understand that it's super contradictory and it's the source of the special debate. Okay, let's take the right to decent wage. So the right to decent wage is not part of the fundamental labor standards, but it is in the Article 7 of the Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. But business very often behaves as if it is not there. So could you comment on this?
Whether social rights are human rights or not is perhaps one of the most difficult ones we have. Of course, we cannot say that each social right is a human right. You know, on the other hand, I'm not very happy about what happened in the ILO. You know, when they made the core labor rights, this declaration, they had first 4, now we have 5 of these rights. What about the others? Are the others not human rights? I think we have to start from the scratch. And we have to ask, what is actually the purpose of human rights? The purpose of human rights is to protect and to achieve human dignity. And the question is, what kind of social rights are necessary to be protected in order to not violate human dignity?
All of them. All of them?
Not all of them. Not all of them.
Which right you don't need?
Well, you know, the right, let's say, to have a break of 5 minutes or of 7 minutes is not very relevant. It is important for you, it's nice. It's good for your, for accommodating you. But I think we should not, if we take each social right as a human right, then we create an inflation which, well, devaluates human rights, in my view. Therefore, I'm very cautious, as, by the way, most people in human rights are telling us. They are telling us, please don't take every social right to be a human right. Let's discuss why it is a human right, you know. And I'm one of those. But I would like to, if I may, and if I have the word, to say a word to I cannot say the name. To Cheryl, yeah. I agree with most of what you said. In particular, I agree with what you said on competitivity. And I also agree that law is not everything. The focus of law is one thing, but we need other approaches. I fully agree. But you see, you cannot leave out binding law. If you look at the perspective of those who are victims of violation of human rights, these people, if there is no law for them to have access to courts, to really get remedies and so on, what shall they do? They have nothing. And here we have a big problem, you know. We had so many cases where we had victims of violations of human rights, in particular in global value chains. And what happened? We had quite a few of these lawsuits. They more or less all ended up in nothing. Why? Because there was not established a system for them to really help them. Neither in their countries, of course, that's difficult, and not, and that's the real point, in the country of the headquarters. And we have to do something. That first of all, the headquarters have to be liable if they are responsible for damages, and there is an easy access for the victims to get something, and there is protection for their families, because that's the victimization there is a very big problem. In short, you know, I agree that binding law is not everything, but without binding law, we will not succeed.
Now we continue to agree, mostly. But the question I would ask you is how a binding treaty will address precisely the points that you have made, because access to remedies has been a challenge for many, 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 many years. And I don't think that an international treaty is unfortunately what will address your specific point. It's a technical issue. So what we should see, rather than a new international treaty that will probably take 15 to 20 more years to negotiate, is what about a campaign at the EU level specifically on access to victims, to jurisdiction? No new treaty, no new laws, no new nothing. What about, for instance, a fund? Because we know that, you know, the UK, for instance, is fairly open to international tort claims. But it costs a lot. What about establishing a fund for victims to hire very good lawyers? No new laws, no international treaty. That can be done tomorrow morning. And you know, the other point, and again, we don't disagree, and again, I want to insist, I'm not against a treaty. I'm just saying that cost benefit, you know, I was something like a diplomat and a negotiator for many years. And I told people, by all means, I mean, I love the substance and I will be busy till, you know, the end of times. But, and I go to the point that you mentioned, that should always be our guiding light, the victims. I can tell you, because it's a discussion I have had many times, that victims don't care about an international treaty. What they care about, no, when you talk to victims, not NGOs, when you talk to victims, what they care about is remedy.
Yes.
Not the same thing. And remedy, today, remedy, you don't necessarily need a new law, because the law, the international treaty, will be as disregarded as the existing one. So let's think about remedy. And you know, because that's something that was very present in our mind. That's one of the reasons why in the guiding principles, one, we have a whole chapter on remediation, and two, we insisted so much on local grievance mechanism, because, you know, justice of proximity is usually good justice. And so by developing those local grievance mechanisms, you give access to remedy. No new law, no new nothing. And because, you know, it's here and now. It's not at some point. And a point that I always make is it's an insult. And I regret that, but it's an insult to victims to make them believe that a committee meeting in the basement of the UN somewhere will provide them with any form of justice or remedy. Because unfortunately, and I'm the first to deplore that, unfortunately, the international regime is extremely weak. The UN is even weaker, and the UN is even weaker for the foreseeable future. So I agree with the point, but we need to start thinking about what will bring remedies to these victims. You know, one time I was, during the mandate, I was in the Philippines, and it was a fascinating day. It was one of the most interesting professional day in my life. I was supposed to present, it was close to the end, to present the draft of the guiding principles. And I got into a discussion with some NGOs that were briefed by their international secretariat. Oh, you know, the guiding principles, corporate sellout, the end of human rights regime, so bad, so bad, so bad. And we also had frontline human rights defenders, and we start talking, and we start going through, you know, the specific steps. And my slot that was supposed to last an hour lasted all the afternoon. I always speak too much, so it's not just today, but and what I could see is that actually frontline people, victims, they don't care about a very nice international solution. They want something for them and their kids tomorrow, today. And an international treaty is not that. And if you believe, and because I have this discussion quite often, if you believe that access to remedies for affected people will be solved by the next treaty, you haven't looked at the last 50 years. That's a problem we have. So, you know, we need to find different ways. And in this space, we are not dealing with a state, we are dealing with a company. So let's be creative to provide those remedies. International treaty won't do it. I disagree.
Thank you. Yes, please, Sarah.
Apologies, I don't know if it works.
I don't understand.
But as we must be creative, for example, the fund that you referred to, in your idea, who will pay for that fund? Because my fear is that the guilty one will not pay nothing. Of course, for the victims will be a good solution to have, for example, some money somehow recovering for their troubles and everything, but how can this fund can be feasible? Who will pay for it?
I don't know. What I know is that, no, well, more seriously, you can imagine that, fundraising is done all the time. I know that, the fundraising is tough these days, but we could imagine, part of development assistance being, well, but we are talking about two different things. You are talking about a company accepting to remedy. I'm talking about funding an international facility that would allow victims to bring claims. And something like that already exists, but just to multiply it, I don't know where the money would come from. All I'm saying is that, I will give you a controversial answer to your question. If all the NGOs that are sending people to the treaty negotiation session in Geneva, where instead of spending money on this, put money in a fund, you would have the start of something.
I hardly see it being implemented. Well, I hardly see it as a feasible initiative, but I think it's very productive to think about alternatives in any case. And I think that the golden middle would be that would reconcile both positions is to go on developing different types of remedies, which are foreseen in the UNGPs, while going on with the negotiation of the binding treaty. But I do really hesitate. I have doubts that we will go further because Germany don't have it in the law. Also in the EU, they now abandoned the possibility of making claims. So it doesn't feel like a good moment. For sure, all the years, the remaining years of Trump, it will not be a good moment.
No. We need campaigning. That's otherwise we won't end up anywhere.
No, and also we international treaty making or international policy making is like a dance. You have to follow a specific rhythm. And if you look at international treaties, they usually come after national legislation and after regional legislation. Here we put the cart before the horses and we started at the international level and we have zero traction. Last year I was saying that now that we have CS-DDD coming up, that will change the dynamic because the EU will, have something. It's a bit on hold, but something that, we need to realize is that, yes, the problem will come from the G7, G8 countries, but don't you think, and don't you believe for a minute that India, Malaysia, China, Russia will be in favor of the treaty? And just for the sake of the argument, don't you find weird or puzzling that the two countries that push for the establishment of the working group are, one, Ecuador, not widely known as a human rights champion, and South Africa, at the moment where they left the ICC, the only accountability system we have internationally. And it's a rhetorical question, but look who you are dancing with. And it might tell you if you are in the right room or not. Because honestly, if I was advising a business or a government that doesn't want to see any progress in the business and human rights space, I would tell them, support the negotiation on an internationally binding treaty so that everything is frozen for the next 20 years. And it's just not me saying it. Look at what happened for the Indigenous Declaration negotiation. 27 years, and they ended up not even with a legally binding, because it's so important, a legally binding instrument, but with a declaration after 27 years. I don't want to wait. I don't want to wait to move.
Well, I agree with you that it is difficult to think of China, Russia, and others, well, to join such a treaty now. Because of that, I thought it is so wonderful that we have now a regulation on European level. Because in Europe, you don't need ratification. You know, with our structure, this is automatically binding. And this is a totally different thing. And we would have established this kind of access for the victims. Now they take it away, you know, with a pretext of bureaucracy and competitivity. It's a shame.
Thank you for the attention. Does anyone want to have a replic, the question, share his or her considerations? No? Then, sure, no? No one? Okay. Then I would like to thank, first of all, our speakers, to thank again the university, thank Professor Marco Macella for this wonderful initiative. I love Jean Monnet Cathedral. And I think we had really a very productive day. It was super interesting for me to listen to you, and particular to the contradictions which were raised in the end. And welcome for the dinner. Thank you. Bye.